Part 128. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1273. Chi Heiran pretended not to see the elder brother's threat, so he asked straightforwardly, "My brother heard that the government is debating endlessly for the reform of the official system. If there is no movement today, is there a result already?" "No results, it's just that people don't want to discuss it in front of you." The emperor and all the courtiers looked at him silently. The water was already muddy enough, neither the emperor nor the courtiers wanted to get muddier. Obviously Chi Heiran is not a considerate person. He still insisted on looking back at everyone. Fan Zijian, who was standing behind him, rolled his eyes, and immediately came out and said, "This matter is still under discussion. I wonder what Prince Rong's opinion is." The emperor and all the ministers stared at Fan Zijian. Fan Zijian stood still. Instead of always trying to put Heiran aside, it would be better for him to stir up the water in the pool. Anyway, they are the ones who are losing the wind, and Heiran is on their side no matter what. Fan Zijian glanced at the emperor and expressed his meaning. Qi Ziyuan looked at him silently. "Have you forgotten the attribute of Heiran's indiscriminate attack?" Fan Zijian, "The enemy has more people than our own. Anyway, it is enough that they are more injured in the end." Fan Zijian expressed his attitude very bachelorly. Qi Ziyuan could only choose to watch. As soon as Qi Ziyuan acquiesced, Fan Zijian immediately said, "The princes in the court are still discussing, but at this time there are many people who oppose it and few people who agree." Chi Heiran said very directly, "This king thinks that the reform of the official system is very good. Why do those who oppose it object? There are many reasons for this. No official system is perfect, and there are always shortcomings. In addition, it is easy for officials to use their power for personal gain in the process of innovation. Therefore, there are sufficient reasons for everyone's opposition. Not all those who oppose it are out of selfishness, and some people consider it from the perspective of national stability. It is indeed not the best time for innovation at this time. Perhaps in another 20 years, under the Great Qi, the country is peaceful and the people are safe. The wind of corruption, when they are getting stronger, if they are still alive, they will definitely not object." The courtiers knew that Prince Rong couldn't understand the words of turning a corner, so in order to reduce conflicts, these words were very straightforward. The officials who proceeded purely from personal interests only listed the disadvantages of innovation and the shortcomings of the new official system, while the other part of officials who proceeded from the current situation expressed earnestly to Prince Rong that it was not that they did not support innovation, but that the time had not come yet. One of Chi Heiran's greatest strengths is that he reacts slowly and has limited brain capacity, so he can always listen to other people's opinions with an open mind. At this time, although he resents these people for bullying his wife and children, he still listens to their reasons seriously. Although he is not smarter than others, he is not stupid. After listening for a long time, he can quickly distinguish who is opposing for the country and who is opposing for personal interests. Chi Heiran first said to the officials who were worried about the country, "I don't know the principles of governing the country, but I came back from the north last year. I have also been to the west. Do you know the situation of the people there?" Everyone was silent. They could get some glimpses from the memorials between the two places, but after all, it was written by officials on paper, and the authenticity can still be tested, let alone comprehensiveness. Chi Heiran sighed. "In Baidi, there are two names for a county, one is the name left by Dezhou, and the other is the name changed by Dejin. Nanfu, Dajianshi was placed under the jurisdiction of Baifu, and the villages under the county belonged to Qianan Prefecture as well as Qiabe Prefecture. Now that a new official takes office, they are either vying for the county or rejecting it. Whose affiliation is uncertain, the people in that county will not be able to get food relief, let alone seeds for farming, farm tools and cattle, and even land surveying and division of land." Chi Heiran became more and more annoyed as he spoke, and his voice gradually became louder, and there are many cases like this in the north and west. Last year, the emperor ordered that no village or town be left behind. All relief must be given in place, so no one will die. It's a big mess. But there are still many disputes between each other, and now it's been nearly a year, and the lords haven't made up their minds yet. What's the use of the imperial court supporting you? The more Chi Heiran talked, the more he felt that Aling was working hard, and he snorted coldly. My princess heard about the sufferings of the people in the two places, and tried her best to think of a way to reform the administrative system, but you obstructed it for your own self-interest. The censor looks like this: if it is a locality, who else can control the selfish desires in your hearts? No wonder the princess insists on setting up the Metropolitan Procuratorate and letting the people supervise the officials. It is really disgusting for the character of the ministers. In this dynasty where civil servants beg for their lives, cursing people's character is as resentful as digging people's ancestral graves. So when Chi Heiran said this, most of the courtiers in the court were angry. But Chi Heiran was not afraid at all. He had already thought about how to deal with it when he returned home quickly, and with the experience of quarreling with Mu Yangling, his voice alone overwhelmed theirs, and he fired at them like a cannonball. Administrative reform is imperative, so that the people in the north and west can no longer make the place so chaotic. If there is no administrative reform, what do you think will be solved? Zuking, what good ideas can you come up with this year? Is it? You are worse than a woman at this point. Both Fan Zijian and Rong Xian stood behind with their heads down, silently watching Chi Heiran fight against 100. Yan Du looked at the two people who were as immobile as a mountain, then glanced at the emperor who was sitting as firmly as a mountain, and decided to remain silent. Anyway, he was in favor of administrative reform, as long as there was no reform of the official system. The officials below also quickly figured this out, and shouted, "Prince Rong, don't slander us. We do not agree with the reform of the official system, but we did not say that we disagree with the administrative reform." Most officials in the DPRK and China responded immediately, and those who did not respond were originally striving for administrative reform. The emperor and Fan Zijian Rongxian complained silently in their hearts. "Obviously you didn't agree to it yesterday, it's really abusive." They said in a good voice that they didn't agree with life and death, but they agreed after being scolded by Chi Heiran. Chi Heiran immediately pursued the victory. Since the administrative reform is agreed, why is the reform of the official system not on time? Wouldn't it be more timely to reform the official system during the administrative reform than 20 years later? Yan Du said coldly, "My lord, if the two laws are carried out at the same time, I'm afraid that even the administrative reform will not be able to go on in the end." "Why?" Chi Heiran looked at him with piercing eyes. "Both laws need the support of local officials. Administrative reform is fine. It's just to standardize local jurisdictions, so that there will be no overlapping of localities or no control. The officials have not changed much, so they will cooperate. But if the reform of the official system is carried out, most of the officials are now, if they do not agree, local officials are even more resistant, and if the two laws are implemented together, I am afraid that the administrative reform will not be able to proceed." Chi Heiran said slowly, "The officials didn't change much, so they agreed, and the reform of the official system touched their interests, so they opposed it." It was a pity that Chi Heiran didn't have a table at hand, otherwise he would have smashed it with his palm to show his anger. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1274. Chi Heiran's eyes widened with anger, and he glanced at the officials one by one, only to see that they all lowered their heads. Chi Heiran turned around and pointed at them and said angrily, "Aling is right, you are a group of beetles. Why do you become officials? For yourself, for your family. But who pays you salaries, who is supporting you and your family? The people of Daki and the Holy One. As long as you have a little heart to repay, you shouldn't be so selfish." Because the reform of the official system has brought you a lot of benefits, so you are trying your best to oppose it? The Lord is here to tell you today that as long as it is beneficial to the people, the reform of the official system has been decided. I will see who dares to move it. Immediately, nearly half of the officials in the hall turned pale, and one of the ministers of the Ministry of Punishment immediately rushed out and kowtowed to Chi Ziyuan, and cried after Tu Bang Bang S, Your Majesty, the ministers are indeed dedicated to the country, but Prince Rong is so slanderous. Let me wait, today I will prove my innocence by death. After saying that, he slammed his head against the big pillar. His movements were too fast, and the courtiers in the hall couldn't react in time. When the official closest to him reached out to grab him, he only had time to grab a piece of his sleeve. All the ministers immediately closed their eyes subconsciously, thinking that when they opened them again, they would see blood splattered everywhere. Several officials were even ready to cry. But as soon as he opened his eyes, he saw that Prince Rong was carrying Lan Chilang, who was about to commit suicide. The other party might have rushed too hard, and he was a little dizzy after being picked up, so he didn't struggle for a while. Chi Ziyuan had already stood up with a ha. Seeing that the bloody incident hadn't happened at this time, he sat back slowly with a sullen face, but his face became more condensed. Regardless of whether this Lan Chilang was ordered to commit suicide, or he really couldn't stand his younger brother's accusation and committed suicide, if he died in the hall today, the reputation of him and his younger brother would be ruined for the rest of their lives. In the past dynasties, how many emperors forced the officials to death? All are tyrants and fools. Chi Ziyuan's expression was ugly. Fan Zijian and Rong Xian looked at the official with livid faces. Chi Heiran threw the person in his hand at his feet without changing his face, and said calmly, Want to die? Yes, resign from the office, and find a secluded place after leaving the palace before committing suicide. Chi Heiran sneered and said, The thing I look down on the most in my life is you, a speech official. I think you can leave your name in history by forcing you to die. Is your life not in vain? Now even Dr. Yushi couldn't see Chi Heiran's aggression anymore. My lord, admonishing is the job of a speech officer. What did he persuade me? Chi Heiran interrupted him rudely. I only heard him say that I slandered him as soon as he came out, and then he died with his head covered. Chi Heiran said coldly, Humph, if this king really did something wrong, you can point it out. If this king is not convinced, he will naturally argue with you. If he is convinced, he will naturally correct it, but he will kill you without saying a word. Could it be that this is the only thing you can do as a speech officer? Chi Heiran slightly raised his chin and said, This king is a military commander who came down from the battlefield. I don't know if your civil servants will die at every turn, but this king knows that human life is precious, and there is only one time. If you die, everything will disappear, so I put aside my words here, unless the other party died for the country, otherwise I will look down on anyone who commits suicide. As soon as the words came out, the civil servants hadn't spoken yet, and the military generals responded one after another, shouting, We have a narrow escape on the battlefield. The thing we fear the most is the sword, but the last thing we are afraid of is the sword. In the end, this man said that we would hit each other. If you die, you will be killed. This life is too worthless, right? The person lying at Chi Heiran's feet reacted a bit. He got up and pointed at Chi Heiran tremblingly, You forced me to commit suicide. Chi Heiran rolled his eyes at him directly and asked, Why did this king force you? You slander the minister. Lan Chilang looked at Chi Heiran accusingly, and said with trembling fingers, The minister is devoted to Daki and the Holy One, but in the end he is so slandered by the prince. Let's not talk about whether what the king said is slander. Even if it is slander, why did you commit suicide alone in the civil and military affairs of the Manchu dynasty? Chi Heiran interrupted him and sneered, The endurance is so low, I really don't know how the officials selected officials back then. Fan Zijian also snorted coldly, This king is also very curious. It is said that Lanchilang is the servant of the Ministry of Punishment and often deals with prisoners. His endurance should not be so low. The Minister of Criminal Justice said calmly, Lanchilang is Xochilang's assistant. He is usually only responsible for handling documents, not cases, so the lower officials don't know how he can bear it. Does this mean that he is not available in the Ministry of Criminal Justice? At this moment, the courtiers also came to their senses. Although Chi Heiran's words just now made them angry, but Prince Rong's words have always been annoying, they are already used to it. Although the words just now were too much, they don't have to kill themselves just because of it, right? Everyone looked at Lanchilang with strange eyes. Chi Heiran didn't care about the people at his feet. In his opinion, business matters were important, so he directly ignored the people at his feet, and brought the topic back to the reform of the official system. He asked the secretary of the household department, how are officials at all levels treated? Seeing Prince Rong's indifferent and calm appearance, all the ministers were speechless. There was almost a murder case. At this time, even if they are endlessly courting, they should take a break to let them relax, right? Everyone looked at Chi Ziyuan sitting up. Chi Ziyuan remained silent with a sullen face, as if he acquiesced to his brother's question. He and his younger brother almost became tyrants and treacherous ministers in the history books. If he didn't find out the reason today, he would definitely not retreat from the court. Chi Ziyuan made up his mind that there must be a result today, so he completely let Chi Heiran do what he did. Chi Heiran aggressively asked about the salaries of the officials of the Minister of the Ministry of Households, from the small officials in the local area to the salaries of the first-rank officials in the court. Fortunately, the Minister of the Ministry of Household Affairs is dedicated enough. He said 7 or 8 points, and other officials of the Ministry of Household Affairs supplemented it, and it was almost the same. But at this time, it was already past the time of the morning court, and it was almost morning. Not only were the officials below so hungry that their chests stuck to their backs, but even Chi Ziyuan himself was hungry enough, but this time he didn't order the court to rest, and even there are no intermissions. When Chi Heiran came here in the morning, he was full of heart to find a place for his wife and children, so he ate a lot of dry food, drank less water, and didn't need to go to the toilet. Other officials would be miserable. Even if they deliberately drink less water in the morning, at this time he couldn't help but tighten his legs, and looked at the emperor vaguely. Seeing that the emperor was as stable as Mount Tai, sitting motionless in the 8 winds, they all went to look at the left and right phases. Yan Du raised his eyes and glanced at Rongxian, and gave him a wink. You are good to the emperor. If you don't want all the officials to lose face, quickly find a way to suspend the court. Rongxian glanced back at him and silently lowered his head as if he didn't see it. Now that I know how to beg him, didn't I quarrel with him very vigorously these 2 days? Didn't everything go away if we promised the reform of the bureaucracy early? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1275. Chi Ziyuan made up his mind to let his younger brother continue to quarrel with the officials. Although Rongxian wanted to sit back and let those people learn some lessons, but seeing that several ministers were already turning purple, he was not afraid of making a fool of them, but he was afraid of making people to suffocate. After thinking about it, Rongxian could only take a step forward to interrupt the Minister of the Household Department and said, Your Majesty, it's getting late, why don't you rest for a while and discuss it after everyone has eaten and rested? Chi Ziyuan glanced at him, not happy. Now that the situation has been controlled by Heiran, should Sancheo ask them to discuss countermeasures in private? Chi Ziyuan couldn't understand Rongxian's meaning. In his opinion, it's not a problem to be hungry once or twice, he is the emperor and he is hungry. The corners of Rongxian's eyes twitched, and he could tell that the emperor didn't understand. He was about to remind one or two vaguely, when Eunuch Wan hurriedly came out of the side hall and walked to the emperor and whispered, "Your Majesty, Princess Rong has come to the front hall." Qi Ziyuan twitched his eyelids and asked, "What is she doing here?" Eunuch Wan lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, "Wang Fei came here in a hurry when she heard that the prince forced the speaker to death in the hall. She has heard the news before I left the court," Qi Ziyuan said meaningfully. "It is precisely because of this that the concubine did not break in. The person who passed the words to her ears has been controlled. Now in the palace, the emperor, do you see?" Qi Ziyuan glanced at all the officials, and said, "Let her in, this matter started because of her, it would be great if it could end because of her." Thus, Eunuch Wan straightened his waist and sang loudly, "Prince Qianrong, concubine Mu, has an audience." The officials were taken aback, and Qi Heiran was also taken aback, and looked anxiously at the elder brother. Why did Aling come here at this time? Didn't she make her a target of public criticism? Mu Yangling came to the palace wearing the princess's clothes. She suddenly heard at home that Qi Heiran had forced the speaker to death, and she was so frightened that she almost rode into the palace. Fortunately, Bowen was by her side at the time, grabbed her and said, "Sister, it may be true that brother-in-law went mad and argued with others at the court meeting, and it may be true that the officials committed suicide, but how could such a big event not end before the court meeting, into your ears? The other party just wants you to panic and do something wrong to take advantage of the shortcomings of you and your brother-in-law." Although Mu Bowen was also in a hurry, he was much calmer than his sister. He said, "The emperor and prince are still in the hall. They won't let my brother-in-law have trouble. The reform of the official system was initiated by my sister. Even if my sister wants to enter Gong-Na has to go in openly and above board, absolutely not intruding into the palace." Mu Bowen said word by word, "Break into the palace is a capital crime." Only then did Mu Yangling change his imperial uniform patiently, and entered the palace in a carriage. As soon as Mu Yangling entered the hall, he glanced at the ground and the pillars, but found no blood, so he was relieved. Even though Eunuch Wan had told her in advance that Lan Zhilang, who was going to commit suicide, was stopped, she still felt that she had to see it with her own eyes. "Don't worry until you see it." Mu Yangling glanced at her husband worriedly and apologetically. The idea of innovation was firstly for the children to stand out, and secondly, he felt that this is indeed a rare opportunity for innovation. He didn't expect this matter to involve Heiran so deeply. No. Mu Yangling sighed, she knew she would still do this, but she might not be so excited anymore. Mu Yangling walked up to Qi Heiran and knelt down. After saluting the emperor, he saw Rongxian winking at her. Mu Yangling blinked, followed his gaze to glance at the group of officials, and instantly understood, thinking that their husband and wife had just offended someone once, and if they don't make amends at this time, I'm afraid Heiran will really suffer in the future. Mu Yangling took the initiative and said, "Your Majesty, when I came here, I asked the kitchen to prepare some meals. Why don't you let the adults rest and discuss while eating?" Qi Heiran frowned, and said harshly, "Aling, don't worry about these things, just go home and stay." Mu Yangling lowered his head meekly and said, "What I said is true, but you haven't had water and rice all morning, and you used very little this morning. I'm really worried." Officials who couldn't hold back followed suit to persuade Qi Heiran, "Prince Rong, the princess is sincere, so don't let me down." "Yes, yes," everyone echoed, "you see, the princess came here in person because of you, and it's not good for you to refuse her kindness." At this time, no one can remember that Mu Yangling is a tigress, and Qi Heiran is afraid of the rumors inside. Everyone just thinks that Princess Rong is too understanding, so you should be the princess, please agree to rest quickly, we are really holding back, can't stop. Qi Heiran was taken aback, looked at them suspiciously, and looked at Qi Ziyuan hesitantly. "Brother Huang, why don't you rest for a quarter of an hour?" All the ministers looked at the emperor eagerly. "Emperor." The emperor was silent for a while, nodded silently, and said, "Then rest for a quarter of an hour, and let the palace people prepare lunch and banquets, and we will discuss while eating." Begwan breathed a sigh of relief, and hurriedly retreated after saluting. So the guards and palace people outside the palace saw a scene that they will never forget in their lifetime. In their eyes, the noble civil servants who were as tall as Hailan Yushu all rushed to the Gongfang. He walked out, intending to find a side hall nearby to solve it. Anyway, they were walking fast. In the main hall, only the left and right prime ministers, Fan Zijian, Qi Heiran, Mu Yangling, and the emperor remained. The 6 people looked at each other in blank dismay, and a small attendant came in from outside the hall and whispered something into Eunuch Wan's ear. Eunuch Wan twitched the corners of his mouth, and went to whisper to the emperor again. Knowing the situation outside, the emperor naturally understood why Rongxian asked him to rest. He twitched the corner of his mouth and waved his hand, "Extend the rest time for another quarter of an hour." Eunuch Wan suppressed a smile and retreated to pass on the message. Qi Ziyuan looked at Rongxian, then at Yan Du, and asked meaningfully, "Aren't you two in a hurry?" Rongxian twitched the corners of his mouth, stepped forward and cupped his hands and said, "Your Majesty, leave." Yan Du also took a step forward, and said in a clear voice, "Your Excellency will leave." Qi Ziyuan waved the two of them back. Rongxian and Yan Du left together, walked out of the main hall. Rongxian turned his head and asked, "Your Prime Minister is not going?" "No hurry." Yan Du shook his head, looked in the direction of the small garden, and said with a smile, "Why don't we go for a walk together? Just go to the side hall, there are few people there. The small garden is for the officials to enjoy and relieve their fatigue after dealing with political affairs. It is very close and not far away, and officials often rest there." Rongxian nodded in agreement. Yan Du followed him for a while, and then gradually moved away from the crowd before saying, "Jin Yu also thinks this is a good time for innovation." Rongxian said, "If the administrative system is reformed, then it is naturally a good time to reform the official system. That is to say, if you want to do both together, if not, then do neither." Yan Du remained silent. He was in favor of administrative reform, but not in favor of bureaucratic reform. Rongxian stood still under a green pine tree, patted it and said, "Zishan, if Taifu Yan was alive, I think he would definitely approve of the reform of the bureaucracy. Didn't he always have such a wish? I don't understand you. Why don't you agree?" The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1276. Yan Du murmured in a low voice, "That's different." "The difference is that you have changed." Rongxian looked at him with a little disappointment. "The Holy Majesty is generous and has raised your hearts and desires, but don't forget that the Emperor was once the two generals who advocate taking back the lost land and put it into action. He is not afraid of blood, but only respects life." Yan Du was silent. Rongxian sneered at the sight. Except for the first few years, the Emperor's methods of governing the country were very gentle, and the yearly tax reduction and exemption made people think he was a cat without claws, but they forgot that he was once a cat waiting for an opportunity. The fierce tiger that was born is now a real dragon. Rongxian turned around and left. These people are really blind, they are afraid of Prince Rong instead of the Emperor. That boy Heiran is arguing a lot, and his heart is actually softer than anyone else. Although the Emperor seldom speaks, once he has made up his mind, no one can change it. Even if he was lying on the side, the Emperor would hesitate at most, what to do or what to do. Yan Du watched Rongxian walk away, couldn't help but hold Qing Song and sighed. His father was as proud and independent as this green pine all his life, but what happened in the end? He was still abandoned by Emperor Jinjian, whom he was loyal to, and he even bore a lifetime of infamy. and the four people in the hall were also talking about the reform of the official system. Mu Yangling said, "Brother, I caused this matter, let me end it, don't involve you, and you can do things well in the future." Chi Heiran immediately went to hold his wife's hand, and said with a straight face, "I'm with Aling, brother, anyway, I almost killed a person just now, let them pour dirty water on me, I'll see what they will write about me in the history books in the future." Fan Zijian said coolly, "If you can't see it, what you can see is not a history book." Chi Heiran choked and couldn't help but stare at him. Chi Ziyuan waved his hands with a headache and said, "Okay, it's already this time, so stop bickering, what happened to that land servant in the morning?" "How would I know?" Chi Heiran jumped up, and he felt aggrieved when he mentioned this. "I didn't target him alone, nearly half of the civil and military people in the Manchu dynasty were scolded by the master, and everyone else was fine, so he rushed out. Do you blame me for committing suicide?" Mu Yangling patted him on the chest soothingly, and said, "I don't blame you, either he did it on purpose, or his endurance is too low. If it's the latter, how did the officials select officials? It's not surprising that officials have such low endurance. How do you serve the people?" Chi Heiran nodded again and again, "That's the truth." Chi Ziyuan couldn't understand this couple, so he endured it, but he didn't smash the paper on the table, he just waved his hand and said, "Anyway, talk to them well later, you can't speak so fiercely, you know." Chi Heiran reluctantly agreed. So when the ministers came back after solving the three emergencies, they found that Prince Rong greeted them with a smile, and they trembled in fright. They were in a hurry to urinate again. Mu Yangling, who was sitting next to him, pinched his leg and said in a low voice, "Be normal." Chi Heiran immediately turned cold, and now the officials trembled even more. Chi Heiran couldn't help but rolled his eyes, shivered when he laughed, and shivered with a cold face. What did he do? Mu Yangling was also quite helpless. This time Chi Ziyuan was angry, and asked the imperial dining room to prepare very simple things, just steamed buns with pickles and a bowl of porridge. All the ministers were speechless when they saw such a configuration. So the emperor, are you protecting your weaknesses and narrow-mindedness to the extreme? But seeing that the food served before the emperor's case and Prince Rong's and his wife's case was the same, the officials suddenly had nothing to say. Chi Ziyuan didn't move his chopsticks, so the officials naturally didn't dare to reach for the chopsticks. Chi Heiran just looked at the food on the table and continued today's topic. "This is white noodle steamed bun and white rice porridge. We think it's very simple food. Nowadays, only 50% of the people in Daki can afford it every day. This is because of planting high-yield grain varieties, improved technology and farm tools. The remaining 50% and nearly 30% of the people mostly eat corn, black and white flour and rice, and 20% of the people still cannot eat enough. Nearly half of the days are spent starving." Chi Heiran looked at them and smiled, and asked, "How many of you here have ever been hungry? It's the kind of hunger that makes you want to eat mud and bark." The ministers looked at each other in blank dismay, and finally a few generals agreed. They were short of food when they fought in the past, and it was not uncommon for them not to eat for a few days. Chi Heiran said, "This king has also been hungry, so I have drank horse urine, eaten guanyin soil, and sometimes even want to eat human flesh." All the ministers were shocked and looked at him in shock. They knew that Chi Heiran must have endured hardships when he marched and fought, but they never thought that it would be so difficult. This time Chi Ziyuan was no longer silent, he said flatly, "I have also been hungry, just like Prince Rong. I have also drank horse urine and eaten guanyin soil. Who of you know what guanyin soil is?" Officials who have been officials in the local area know it, and the Minister of the Household Department also knows it. He said in a deep voice, "Guanyin soil looks like flour, but if you eat too much, you will die. People will choose this thing when they can't find anything to eat. If you are not careful, you will die." Chi Ziyuan sighed and said, "Yes, who would eat Guanyin soil unless forced to do so? It has only been 13 years since the country fell in the Great Zhou dynasty, so you must have forgotten the life of the people in the Great Zhou dynasty, right? Bandits were everywhere at that time. Do you really think they were forced by 11 Xia and Dijin? Qi Ziyuan said in a deep voice. In fact, they were forced by the imperial court. I don't deny that there are some traitors in this world who want to rise up and replace Qi. In short, there are more people in this world who have no choice but to never rebel, and the reform of the official system is not only for me and the people, but also for the peace of Daqi. Qi Ziyuan ignored Mu Yangling, who was hesitant to speak, looked at the officials with piercing eyes and said, nowadays the people can't even eat enough. If there are corrupt officials in a place, the local people will definitely suffer even more. I don't want one day Daqi was overrun by the people, and only then did we realize what was wrong. Your Majesty, Princess Rong is scaremongering. You must not listen to what women say. As soon as Qi Ziyuan's voice fell, an official rushed forward and said, Your Majesty, since the beginning of Tang Dynasty, I have used this kind of official system in the Central Plains. I didn't see any big troubles. The Great Tang and the Great Zhou are both gone, haven't there been any troubles yet? Mu Yangling sarcastically asked. The man blushed immediately and said, Princess, don't talk nonsense. The Tang dynasty and the Great Zhou dynasty were destroyed because of the military chaos. Qi Heiran sneered unceremoniously and said, Why is there a war? Isn't it because the emperor and the treacherous ministers are in power, making the common people miserable? So everyone quarreled again, wondering how the Tang dynasty and the Zhou dynasty perished. Seeing the chaotic courtroom, Mu Yangling couldn't help but patted the table and shouted, Okay, stop arguing. Mu Yangling looked at them and sneered, Aren't you just afraid that after the official system is changed, you will have more restrictions and you will get less benefits? This princess tells you that even if you don't change the official system, don't let anyone be corrupt if you want to escape. Princess Ben will ask the Times to publish an article tomorrow. From now on, our Times will accept real name reports from the people, and all prefectures and counties will accept them. At that time, they will be handed over to Dali Temple for thorough investigation, and no corrupt officials will be able to escape. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1277. Begwin looked at Mu Yangling in shock. What else could he do? Yan Du also looked at her in surprise, while Fan Zijin squeezed his fist, encouraging her to continue talking with his eyes. Qi Heiran became anxious. Isn't Aling offending people to death? It doesn't matter if he offends people, anyway, he is Prince Rong, he can block open or hidden arrows, but Aling is different, he can't be by her side all the time, she has a simple mind, what if someone bullies her? Qi Heiran anxiously pulled her sleeves. Mu Yangling waved his hands, ignored him, and continued to coldly say to everyone, I will pass the newspaper to my son after my princess dies, and my son will pass it on to my grandson. In short, my lineage of Prince Rong has fallen in love with corrupt officials. What's the matter? The officials were too shocked to speak. What else could they do? They can't justify corrupt officials and princesses. Everyone's mouths moved, but they couldn't utter a word. It is a well-known fact that Prince Rong hates officials who are greedy and cruel. If the Times really starts to accept people's reports, the officialdom will not know how chaotic it will be. Qi Heiran held his wife's hand, glared at her, turned to the officials and said, This morning, the Minister of the Ministry of Households reported the salaries and benefits of officials at all levels. You should know that you will support your family with the salaries given to you by the imperial court. There are more than enough people. Why do you still have to take bribes? If you don't break the law and discipline, why should you be afraid of the supervision of the officials of the Metropolitan Procuratorate? An old minister shook his beard and said, Your Majesty, our objection is not because we want to embezzle and accept bribes, but because the official system has changed a lot. I'm afraid that all officials will feel uncomfortable, and conflicts will inevitably arise when they conflict. Chi Heiran snorted and said, when you entered the imperial examination, you suddenly changed from a scholar to an official. The change is not insignificant, and I don't see any discomfort from you. The Dr. Yushi saw the needles and said, what the prince said is very true. Although the officials of my Yushitai have never been stationed in the local area, as long as the court regulates powers and responsibilities, no matter how difficult it is, our Yushi will try our best to do it. Seeing that they were silent, Chi Heiran began to compare with them the difference between the lives of officials and ordinary people. Da Chi treated the officials very well, hundreds of times better than those national welfare benefits given by the Communist Party in his previous life. The lowest-ranking 9th-rank official has official land after he works in the local area. In addition to the Yanjai land he has been allocated, even if officials now have to pay land taxes, he can still support himself and his family. What's more, in addition to the official land, the imperial court also gives them lumi and salary every year. 9th-rank officials get 3 stones and 11 taels of silver. Raising 2 families also makes it possible. This is still the case for 9th-rank officials, let alone 1st-rank officials above. Chi Heiran is now leading the salaries of a 1st-rank general and a 2nd-rank deputy secretary of the Ministry of War, and the annual income from the official land alone fills the treasury. However, in places with bitter cold such as southwest, northwest, etc., due to the barren land, officials can not only share more official land, but also fill up the vacancy every year. It can be said that the treatment of officials in Daki is very good, and there will be no shortage of official salaries at all. The phenomenon of living in poverty. Daki is not the Ming dynasty. And these are the obvious income, the gray income and the local ice and charcoal offerings, as well as the income from the shop they opened secretly. Now Chi Ziyuan wants to reform the official system, but he just wants them not to stretch their hands too far. Except for Bingjing and Tanjing, don't take what shouldn't be taken. You are all blocking it. Chi Heiran made it very clear, I know what kind of gray income you all have, if you are sensible, let go of the black income, which is also beneficial to the people, otherwise the master will cut off the gray income for you too. All ice and charcoal tributes will be returned to the treasury or abolished, and then the shops will be strictly inspected to see which officials dare to open their doors for business in private. Chi Heiran put on a look of being more aggressive than you, and the emperor silently expressed his support. The officials who opposed the reform could only stare at him with beards. Chi Heiran could afford to gamble, but they couldn't. If they really wanted to carry on, Chi Heiran could really do such a crazy thing. At this time, the veterans in the court all remembered that the court abolished the system of exempting candidates and officials from land tax. At that time, many people died and a lot of blood was shed. Even the policy of tax exemption for those with fame is exempted, let alone the reform of the official system. Officials who originally opposed the reform of the bureaucracy shut their mouths tightly and stopped opposing, but they did not support it either. Yan Du could only sigh in his heart. Rong Xian and Fan Zijin looked at each other, they were both a little speechless to Begwen. We both argued with you in good spirits and you are not convinced, this couple must torture you again, it is really cruel. This court meeting lasted for a whole day, and when the officials left the hall, their feet were a little vain. Mu Yangling watched the crowd walk away, turned back to Rong Xian and Fan Zijin and said, although the reform of the official system is imperative, it is best to be steady at this time, and it is better to be slow than to rush. Although they have shut up now, but in private it may not be without action, the more stable we are at this time, the better. Chi Heiran was suddenly dissatisfied and said, you also know that it is better to be steady, so you are still threatening them in the palace. Now that there is no outsider, Mu Yangling didn't save face for him, he just rolled his eyes and said, it's not because of you, if someone almost committed suicide because of this, would I need to go to the palace to threaten them? Does the Lord need you to share it? Even if the person is really dead, Is it possible that there are still people who dare to ask the Lord to pay for his life? Chi Xiaoyuan had been watching the fight between their husband and wife, but he couldn't hold it anymore when he heard the words. He took the papers from the royal case and threw it on his head, angrily said, "You have the face to say it? Today the Highness is going to be really dead, look at me to protect you or not." Chi Xiaoyuan was about to be mad at his younger brother. The more he thought about it, the more unhappy he became, so he just threw a letter at him. Fan Zijian and Rong Xian stood with their hands together and looked at each other carefully. Mu Yangling also stood aside honestly, not daring to stop him. Qi Heiran didn't dare to hide, so he could only lower his head and let a letter fall on his body until Qi Xiaoyuan had nothing to throw. Qi Xiaoyuan sat on the dragon chair for a while, and said, "Don't go to court recently, it's okay to take Ah Ling out of Beijing to play for a while, in short, avoid the limelight first." A cold light flashed in Qi Xiaoyuan's eyes, and he said, "The reform of the official system is a major event, they may not be willing to let it go, you will become a target if you stay in Beijing." This time the couple offended everyone who could be offended. "I have been too kind in recent years, so that they have forgotten the duty that the courtiers should have." He knew that when the water is clear, there will be no fish, so he allows the existence of Bingjing and Tanjing, but this does not mean that he can allow they further took over the people. Qi Xiaoyuan has always been determined to move forward, but at this moment, his coldness was much more terrifying than Qi Heiran's angry appearance. Rong Xian and Fan Zijian lowered their heads, knowing that the emperor was angry. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1278. Qi Heiran never likes to give up halfway when doing things, so he insists on staying to see the results, and he will not go anywhere until the innovation is carried out. Qi Xiaoyuan was so angry that he yelled at him, "Get out!" Qi Heiran stared at him with a straight neck, and Qi Xiaoyuan glared at Mu Yangling, "Pull him down, don't your family always want to go out to visit the mountains and rivers? This time, I will give you this opportunity to take the prince as well, bring it on." Mu Yangling said seriously, "Brother, it's fine for Heiran and I to leave, we can't help much anyway, but Xiaoxiang and Xiaobao can't leave." Qi Heiran glared at her, thinking that this old man is not as useful as a son. Xiaobao is the crown prince, and he proposed the innovation. If he was not in the court, wouldn't he be running away? No matter how difficult the road ahead is, he must bear the responsibility that should be borne by him. The same is true for Xiaoxiang. The two of them must stay. Qi Heiran became more and more dissatisfied. The two of them can't be deserters together, but the master can. What kind of deserter are you? You didn't propose the innovation. You mixed it in to avenge us. Qi Heiran refused to accept it, and said to Qi Xiaoyuan, "If I don't leave, let's see who dares to do something." Qi Xiaoyuan pursed his lips and looked at him. Qi Heiran didn't dare to confront his eldest brother head-on, pulled Mu Yangling and turned around to leave. Fan Zijian persuaded Qi Xiaoyuan, "Your Majesty, as long as you believe in Heiran, why should he be afraid? I believe in him, but not all the people in the world believe in him. If something happens, I'm afraid I will regret it with his violent temper." Fan Zijian also hurriedly turned around to chase after Qi Heiran when he heard about it. In the final analysis, Qi Xiaoyuan was still afraid that someone would frame Qi Heiran and force him to kill his relatives with righteousness. Heiran is not a person who has no desires and has a violent temper. It is too easy to frame him. He doesn't need others to think carefully, and now he can come up with more than a dozen schemes to deal with him. And Xiaobao and Heiran are Qi Xiaoyuan's weaknesses, everyone knows this. So at this time it is best for Qi Heiran to leave the capital to hide from the limelight. Fan Zijian rushed to persuade him. Qi Heiran said angrily, I'm not a woman, I can take care of myself and don't need my elder brother to take care of me. You're talking nicely now. Tell me, how many troubles have you caused in these years, and let your big cousin clean up your tail?" Seeing that he couldn't make sense, Fan Zijian turned to Mu Yangling and said, "You chose this matter, get up. You also said that innovation makes us stable, but Heiran is here to set a target for others. How can we be stable if we worry about him day and night? You must take Heiran away." Mu Yangling looked at Chi Heiran, who was full of anger and hated iron and steel, and leaned into his ear and said, "You are so stupid. In the capital, there are big brothers and Zijin who watch that we are restricted in what we do. We can only do it when we leave the capital." "Chance?" Chi Heiran asked blankly, "What chance? What other chance is there?" "Of course, I will help the eldest brother and give those people a chance to make trouble." Mu Yangling snorted, "What can we do in the capital? You can't get involved in the innovation, except for raising your voice at the court meeting. What else can you support? But it's different outside the capital. The sky is high and the birds are flying, the sea is wide and the fish are leaping. We let the houses of those who oppose the courtiers catch fire. Do they still have the strength to destroy the elder brother and Zijin?" Chi Heiran rolled his eyes, and realized instantly, touched his chin and said, "You mean to implicate all their pond fish?" Mu Yangling snorted and smiled. Her 10-year concubine was not for nothing. Although she seldom had contact with concubines, she also knew that officials love to contact and have relatives. The same subjects, fellow countrymen, disciples, in-laws, and even colleagues all have relationships with each other. These are connections. They don't want to reform the bureaucracy because once the new bureaucracy is implemented, the connections they used to maintain will be marked with a 3-point discount. Money, and lose contacts. Officials in central Beijing must have connections with the local government, Mu Yangling said. We just need to follow their same subjects, fellow countrymen, disciples, and in-laws to check, and we will definitely find out the problem. Then we will see if they still have time to worry about it. Make trouble for eldest brother and Zijin. Chi Heiran embraced Aling in surprise, and boasted, "Aling, you are so smart." Mu Yangling raised his head proudly. If Chi Ziyuan knew that the two of them were not going out to avoid the limelight, but to attract attention, they would definitely not let them go out of Beijing today. But if money is hard to buy, he would have known it earlier. When Chi Ziyuan knew it, his guts would turn green with regret. And Chi Heiran and Mu Yangling didn't expect that they would be away for 3 years. They were just going out for a walk, but under the pressure of the situation, they could only keep wandering outside. Chi Ziyuan was right, there are indeed many people secretly wanting to deal with Chi Heiran and Mu Yangling. This couple is too bad. There is no such thing. Every time they do something to make trouble, there must be Chi Heiran. As for Chi Heiran's high position and authority, and the favor of the emperor, it is too difficult to overthrow him politically, but it is even more difficult to assassinate him. Who doesn't know that Chi Heiran's martial arts are so powerful that no one in the court can compare? Even in the arena, there are not many people who are his opponents. So after many considerations, they decided to start from various aspects. First, they should find a way to provoke his relationship with the emperor's brother. In this world, father and son, brothers, and husband and wife can turn against each other, let alone royal brothers. Now the emperor favors and trusts him, but Chi Heiran holds such great military power and has trained so many generals. If they don't believe in the emperor, they won't have doubts in their hearts, and sometimes they only need to plant a seed to provoke him. Second, to destroy Prince Rong, it is probably faster to start from inside his backyard, and Princess Rong is too hateful. That woman is 30, they don't believe that when facing a young and beautiful girl in her teens, Chi Heiran would not be moved at all. Third, start with his children. If the situation permits, seduce them all. If not, he will first lurk and provoke him slowly, so that his sons will fight for the position of the son first. They didn't believe that Chi would still be able to stand tall after a few years, or 10 years later. In short, many people secretly started preparing, but Chi took Mu Yangling back home and waved his hand. "Pack up your things, Dad will take you on a tour." The twins cheered immediately, and Chi held the twins' ears and said, "You two will live in the palace for me, or you will live in your Uncle Fan's house. Anyway, I won't take you this time." The tiger head and the little lion asked accusingly, "Why?" "Because you still have to go to school." Chi had a very good reason, pointing to the twins and said, "Little Leopard and Bezu are still young, your father and I can enlighten them, so they can survive the disaster." Mu Yangling pushed him when he heard the words, and said, "Don't use idioms indiscriminately." The twins immediately became happy when they heard the reason, and said, "Mr. has assigned us homework, and we have a month's vacation. Dad, we are free. The reborn wife is farming." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1279. Chi was curious, what homework takes a month? On the rationality of the reform of the official system, Hutu waved his hand. "Anyway, that's what it means. I heard that there was a fight at the court meeting today for the reform of the official system. A servant of the Ministry of Punishment was almost forced to death, so our husband temporarily we assigned this assignment to right after we had fully investigated the facts, so we were given a month." Chi blushed with anger, and said angrily, "Why is your husband also a gossip? When did you force that land servant? He is obviously the one who wants to kill him." The tiger head and the little lion looked at him with their mouths wide open, and complained, "So Daddy, you are the villain who holds a big knife and angrily bullies the servant." Mu Yangling's face was also full of black lines, and he asked, "Where did you hear these rumors?" "It's spread all over the outside world," said the little lion. "We passed by the tea house when we came back from the palace, and we went in to listen to what the storyteller was talking about inside, and now everyone is talking about it." Mu Yangling and Chi looked at each other, their hearts sank. Chi patted the heads of the two children and said, "Don't listen to the fact that the wind is the rain. Who dares to carry a weapon in the hall? Hold a big knife. If you hear such rumors in the future, you must learn to distinguish the truth from the false, understand?" The little lion and the tiger head were annoyed, "So they are slandering Daddy, let's go to them to settle the score." Chi grabbed their collars and pulled them back, saying, "Okay, pack up quickly, we will leave Beijing in 2 days, don't you go out and cause trouble for me." They only spent a little time in the palace, and what happened at the court meeting was made up into a story and spread to the tea house. If it wasn't for someone doing it intentionally, they wouldn't believe it even if they killed Chi. And the energy of the person who did it intentionally is not low, or too many people contributed to the flames, so the news spread so fast. But no matter it is the former or the latter, Chi and Mu Yangling will not let a few children out again, so as not to be provoked by others. Hutu and the little lion were detained at home by Chi, and the little bear was studying with Xiaobao in the East Palace, which made the people waiting on the street waiting for a day in vain. But they were not disappointed. The children of Prince Rong's family were very naughty, and they would come to the streets to play after school almost every day. If they couldn't wait today, they could always wait tomorrow. At this time, Chi Ziyuan in the palace also received the news from the outside, and learned that the tea houses and restaurants outside were full of rumors, saying that Prince Rong almost killed Lan Xilang, who had a political disagreement with him, with a big knife. Chi Ziyuan's face was ugly, and he ordered the commander of the imperial army in a calm voice, "Go and find out where the news came from, and who is behind the manipulation." The commander of the imperial army was ordered to retreat, and Chi Ziyuan called the commander of the secret guards, "You also go to find out the source." Within an hour of our departure, the tea houses and restaurants in the capital were already full of rumors. "So Idaki, what kind of secrets are there? Today is the news at the court meeting, Will even the secrets of the army be spread tomorrow? The commander of the Dark Guard immediately responded. The more Qi Ziyuan thought about it on the way to Cunning Palace, the more frightened he became. When he saw Li Jinghua, his face almost sank into water. Li Jinghua had already received the news, and probably knew why he was troubled, so she asked in a low voice, "Why don't you let fourth uncle go out of Beijing to escape?" Li Jinghua said worriedly, "Those people lost in the court, but they are aggressive outside. After all, the fourth uncle only has one person, and the family is full of women and children. The tiger head and the little lion are naughty. It is easy to hide and difficult to guard against. That's what I'm thinking about." Zijin said that he has agreed to go out to escape, but it will take 2 or 3 days to pack up. However, it only took an hour outside to spread the rumors all over the capital. I'm afraid that the other party's actions it's going to be a lot faster than we thought, so I want them to leave early tomorrow morning. Li Jinghua was startled. In such a hurry? Fourth uncle will definitely not agree. Yeah, run away like fleeing. Heiran has always been proud, he will definitely not agree. Qi Ziyuan really had a headache, he said with a hand on his forehead, but now I have to watch everywhere, I really can't take care of him. The Dark Guard reported that several waves of people were ambushed on the 2 streets where Tiger Head and Little Lion go most often this afternoon. Li Jinghua's face darkened. Do they still dare to assassinate members of the royal family? It's okay if it's an assassination, Qi Ziyuan sighed. There are a lot of hidden guards around the children, and their own skills are not weak, and they are in a busy city, so they are not afraid of assassination. As long as a head or a lion cub accidentally kills one person, Heiran, who insists on abolishing the restrictions on public prosecution and government reform, will definitely suffer the first bitter fruit. What a vicious strategy. That's why I want him to leave early tomorrow morning. Qi Ziyuan stood up and paced the room, and said in a low voice, but he definitely shouldn't say it. A Ling came forward. Li Jinghua's heart moved, and she asked with a smile, so the emperor wants me to persuade A Ling? Qi Ziyuan nodded. It's going to be dark today, and it's going to be too much noise to announce her entry into the palace. Zi Tong has to go there in person, and, Qi Ziyuan sighed, Haoran is arrogant, A Ling is not much more humble than him. I'm afraid I will not agree to leave in such a haste, and I will have to ask Zi Tong to persuade me a little bit more. Qi Ziyuan said coldly. Zitong told her that one day I will grandly invite them back, and use Shui's shame of avoiding disaster today. Li Jinghua bowed and saluted, solemnly said, Don't worry, Your Majesty, this concubine will definitely persuade her. At this time, Fan Zijin also looked at the note in his hand with a livid face. He rubbed the note and crushed it, then got up with a frosty face and went to Prince Rong's mansion. He didn't expect these officials to move so fast, and they had already started to trick Heiran, and he didn't expect that the courtiers would have such a big reaction to the reform of the official system, and they would boldly form a clique to attack Heiran. If it wasn't for him still holding a secret agent, I'm afraid he wouldn't have noticed the movements under the bustling capital today. Heiran must leave Beijing immediately. The capital city is too complicated and dangerous, and not only Heiran has to leave, but also several children have to leave, otherwise if something happens to one of them, he and Heiran will have no place to cry. Fan Zijin hurried to find Qi Heiran. At this time, a small green cloth carriage drove out of the palace. Li Jinghua was sitting in it, and her personal female official Wen Kui was kneeling in front of her. Wen Kui boiled a cup of tea for the queen, and asked in a low voice, Your Majesty, are you really so powerful? Why have the emperor and the prince not survived the storm, afraid of their plots and tricks? Didn't the royal family, bandits, and aristocratic families lose in the past? Well, as long as the emperor trusts the prince, why should he and the princess hide outside the capital? The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1280. Li Jinghua sighed, the situation is different, I'm afraid even the emperor and prince didn't expect this. It was a troubled time when the royal family of the Zhou dynasty was overthrown and the bandits were suppressed. At that time, there was no need to reason, and the courtiers never thought of saying something about etiquette and morality to the emperor and the prince. They just needed the army to crush them. And when the family was cleaned up, the rebellion had just been quelled and the country was not stable. At that time, Qi Heiran had too much blood on his hands, and the emperor was born as a general, full of evil spirits. The two brothers only needed to stand forward and show their attitude. Come on, even if they object in their hearts, they dare not express it with their mouths. Li Jinghua said in a low voice, the thing that most affects their interests is the abolition of the unlimited land tax exemption for juren and officials. At that time, some people opposed it, but the country was not completely stable at that time. They were afraid of losing their lives in another war. The emperor's iron and blood methods are deeply rooted in the hearts of the people, so that this policy can be carried out to the end, but now more than 10 years have passed, the emperor is kind, and all the officials have long forgotten the cruelty of the emperor and the prince, and their hearts have grown up, so it is bold. Although the current regulatory reform has increased the supervision of officials and loosened the control of the people, in fact, when it comes to harming interests, it is still the matter of abolishing the unlimited tax exemption of famous people. It is estimated that the ministers also thought of this. Fierce opposition. After all, their interests have been stripped away bit by the emperor. If they agree to the new official system of supervising hundreds of officials now, what right will they have in front of the emperor in the future? The onlookers can see clearly, because Li Jinghua has not been in this game, he can see it more clearly than Qi Ziyuan and others. It was Mu Yangling who put forward the policy of abolishing the land tax on meritorious service above juren, and Qi Heiran presided over it. They took all the new and old grudges into account. Wen Kui couldn't help clicking her tongue, and said in a low voice, but a few days ago, the queen concubine also mentioned the reform of the official system, wasn't there nothing wrong at that time? That's because Aling was mentioned, no matter what, she is still a woman, and the officials don't think the emperor will adopt her opinion, and Zhou Xiang and several ministers propose to adopt her administrative reform opinion, they will also subconsciously to exclude Aling. I think this is the idea of Zhou Xiang and several ministers. They are all officials. When they put forward their opinions, they can oppose or support them. They can make a decision slowly by themselves, but it is different if the prince participates in it. Li Jinghua smiled and said, the emperor has never stopped what the prince wants to do, so that in the past 10 years, everything he wanted to do has been done. From suppressing the bandits to subduing the family, to taxation reform, to opening the Forbidden Sea, and recovering the lost land, he has done everything he wanted to do. The courtiers were afraid when they heard that Prince Rong was going to participate in it, so they gathered together to attack it. Doesn't that mean that the princess is implicated by the prince, not that the prince is implicated by the concubine? Li Jinghua said with a smile, whether the two of them are involved or not. If they really want to divide, it is also a burden to each other. The prince got involved because of Aling's anger, and Aling is for Xiaobao and Xiaoxiang. Li Jinghua shook her head and laughed when she said this, speaking of which, Xiaobao and Xiaoxiang have implicated them, and I, the Queen Mother, have to pay some responsibility. Ma'am. Li Jinghua shook his hand and said, the courtiers look down on women, so they don't take the same words from Aling's mouth to heart, but from the prince, they are like a big enemy. Wen Kui, maybe Aling said that's right, we have to let the world hear our woman's voice, and let those men stop listening to us like the wind when they hear us. Wen Kui's face was full of confusion. Aren't they talking about the prince and concubine's avoidance of disaster? How did it involve the woman's matter? The corner of Li Jinghua's mouth turned up slightly. How about this as my condition for letting her leave Beijing? Mu Yangling has always wanted to improve the status of women. Li Jinghua does not object to this, but she does not strongly support it. She is more of a spectator and indifferent, because she is the mother of a country. There are some things that Mu Yangling can do, but she cannot. But now she wanted to do it. Li Jinghua looked at the passers-by in the street, and felt a little panicked. It was only a few months since she left the palace last time, but she hadn't seen such an ordinary street scene for more than 10 years. Li Jinghua said to herself in her heart, to persuade people, you need some bargaining chips, and this is her bargaining chip. Mu Yangling looked at Li Jinghua in astonishment, and asked, what did you say? Li Jinghua smiled and said, didn't you always want me to make it clear that I will strongly support women's studies? Now I promise you, I also promise to increase the number of female officials in the palace and reduce the number of years for them to enter the palace. They don't have to be 25 years old, those who have reached the age of 23 can apply to leave the palace, and I will also try my best to promote women's schools, so that more women can learn to read and learn a skill. Mu Yangling looked at her suspiciously, you left the palace in a hurry just to tell me this. Then it's fine to say no when she enters the palace tomorrow, and why not leave the palace on purpose? Li Jinghua smiled and said, of course not, but I have something to ask of you. Mu Yangling breathed a sigh of relief, and said happily, you can tell me what to do, as long as I can do it, I will try my best to do it. You can definitely do it, Li Jinghua said, convince the prince to leave Beijing tomorrow. Li Jinghua shared the concerns of the emperor and her, and finally sighed, none of us thought that the courtiers would react so strongly and completely disregard the dignity of the monarch and his ministers. Both the emperor and I feel that it is easy to hide the open gun and difficult to guard against the hidden arrow, so it is better to leave. Mu Yangling's face gradually sank, and he lifted his chin and said, we are walking upright and sitting upright. Are we afraid that they will fail? Why aren't you afraid? Li Jinghua said, if they are shameless, who can compare to them? Besides, the prince will always go out to socialize. As long as he drinks, a woman from a good family will jump on him. Saying that he has insulted her innocence, will the prince accept her or not? If the prince dares to say a word no, she will be killed immediately, and the prince will not be able to speak clearly at that time. No, Li Jinghua shook his head and said, if I were the other party, he would not let the prince take a concubine at all. Instead, he rushed out and accused the prince of rape, and then committed suicide in public. No matter whether the prince touched her or not, in the eyes of the world, the prince will be such a person. Even if we found evidence to prove that it was a slander, the other party can also say that we are officials and officials protecting each other. Seeing Mu Yangling's serious face, Li Jinghua took her hand and said, this is the simplest strategy, and it can only ruin the prince's reputation. There are many more vicious and disgusting things than this. You can pick up a lot at your fingertips. This is for the prince, but it can be other conspiracies for you and the child. How much effort can you and the prince have to prevent these conspiracies? What's more, it's impossible to guard against. Mu Yangling lowered his eyes and said, my lord and I were going to hide, but it's too urgent to leave tomorrow, and the lord must not want to. Is face more important than face? Li Jinghua looked at her seriously and said, Aling, you have to think about the prince. At this time, Fan Zijin poked Chi Heiran's head angrily and asked, is it important to face or Aling and the children? You don't think about yourself, but also about Aling and the children. Your rough-skinned Ho is not afraid, what should they do? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1281. In the evening, the couple sat cross-legged on the bed and were relatively speechless. Mu Yang got lucky and said, Hao Ran, I have something to tell you. Grandfather also has something to tell you. According to the rules of TV dramas, Mu Yangling immediately said, let me talk first. Chi Heiran was not thinking about how to explain it to Aling, so he nodded indifferently and said, "Okay, you go first." Mu Yangling carefully looked at his face and said, "Heiran, let's leave early in the morning. Anyway, we don't have much luggage, so there's no need to stay and be attacked and idle." Chi Heiran was taken aback for a moment, then blinked, seeing Aling looking at him eagerly. He was overjoyed. He didn't need to mention such embarrassing words. Chi Heiran coughed lightly, and said seriously, "Even if we don't have much luggage, the clothes, medicinal materials, and various living utensils we carry with us, it will take 2 or 3 days to pack them." "No, no need," Mu Yangling waved his hand and said, "let's go lightly, and let Guyu and the others take care of the rest of these things, and then let them catch up." Chi Heiran reluctantly said, "Okay, just do as you said." Chi Heiran pulled the quilt over Aling's body, and said softly, "It's very late, go to bed quickly, since we have to leave tomorrow, we have to get up early." Mu Yangling didn't expect to persuade Chi Heiran so easily, so he was still a little dizzy at this time, and he still couldn't react when he was knocked down and lay on the bed. It took a while for her to turn around and face him face to face, and asked, "You agree now?" Chi Heiran said vaguely, "Which time did you not agree to what you mentioned?" Mu Yangling thought about it and accepted the reason. Since the couple decided to leave the next day lightly, they naturally got up early. Except for Xiao Xiang, the other children followed them. Chi Heiran stood in the yard watching everyone pack their luggage. Mu Yangling put on a cloak for him. Chi Heiran patted her hand and said, "I will go to the palace to see the elder brother, and take the little bear out by the way, I have something to tell him. I'm watching at home, you go." It was only 5 o'clock at this time, and the curfew on the street had just ended. Not long after Chi Heiran went out, he saw a car parked at the corner, and he hurriedly reined in the horse and stepped forward. Fan Zijin lifted the curtain of the car and said to him, "Take the carriage and enter the palace, we just have a chat." Chi Heiran threw the horse to the guard behind him. Seeing Fan Zijin again, Chi Heiran's expression remained solemn. Fan Zijin took the kettle on the stove and made him a cup of hot tea, and handed it to him. "I won't be away for too long, and I will definitely let you all come back in a good mood." Chi Heiran rolled his eyes at him and said, "Okay, I'll wait." Fan Zijin smiled and asked, "How did you convince Aling?" Chi Heiran proudly said in an instant, "I don't need to persuade you, Aling took the initiative." Fan Zijin paused, doubtful. How could she think of leaving today? If he hadn't been well informed and noticed some abnormalities, he wouldn't let Heiran and the others leave at this time. Chi Heiran's face darkened slightly, and he said, "The emperor's wife came here yesterday." Chi Heiran naturally had Fan Zijin's doubts, so when he got up early in the morning, he called Li Chun to question him, and only then did he know that the queen had quietly visited the mansion yesterday. This means that it is the emperor's intention to let him leave immediately. Even the emperor asked him to avoid the edge temporarily, which shows how united the officials are this time. Chi Heiran sneered and said, "These people form cliques for private interests, but they have their own interests. I do things outside, and you investigate in Beijing. I don't believe that you can't break their cliques." Fan Zijin nodded repeatedly. As long as Chi Heiran was willing to leave at this time, he would agree to anything. The two cousins entered the palace with serious expressions to meet Chi Xiaoyuan. Seeing his younger brother, Chi Xiaoyuan sighed in his heart, but his face was very stern. He reprimanded him, "After leaving Beijing, you are not allowed to do anything wrong, and listen to Aling's advice more, but there must be a lot of bodyguards and hidden guards. Do you know how many people want to kill you now? There are people in the imperial army that you can trust and take some away." Chi Heiran waved his hand and said, "No need, I brought all the guards and hidden guards of the mansion with me, there is no need for the imperial army." Chi Xiaoyuan was taken aback, and asked, "You took everyone away, what about the little bear?" Chi Heiran asked strangely, "Doesn't Xiao Xiang live in the East Palace?" He is always accompanied by guards and secret guards. Chi Xiaoyuan's face was full of black lines. How many people are you going to leave for him? Chi Heiran licked his face and said with a smile, then why don't you arrange a few more people for him? This is clearly asking him for a hidden guard. Chi Xiaoyuan couldn't help but hit him with the books on the table, thinking that he was going to leave. He couldn't bear it, so he threw down the book in his hand and glared at him. Your son is already waiting at the gate of the palace, get out, this time there is no, the edict is not allowed to run back. Chi Heiran knew that the eldest brother had agreed to allocate the manpower to Xiao Xiong, and happily pulled Fan Zijin away. Waiting at the gate of the palace are not only Little Bear, but also Xiao Bao. The eyes of the two were red, as if they had just cried. Seeing Chi Heiran coming, Xiao Xiong immediately bowed his head in pain, and admitted his mistake. Daddy, it's all my fault, I caused you trouble. Xiao Bao also admitted his mistake. Fourth uncle, we really didn't expect the courtiers to react so strongly. It didn't matter if you exempted them from the preferential treatment of land tax exemption. Who knew that this time it was just to reform some official systems? Xiao Bao lowered his head and said sadly, it's all our fault. We didn't think carefully and caused trouble for our fourth uncle and aunt. The two children were woken up early in the morning to be notified that Chi Heiran's family was leaving Beijing today. They are no longer 3-year-olds, and they really thought that they went out of Beijing just to go sightseeing in the mountains and rivers. Leaving in such a hurry, everyone left except Xiao Xiong, obviously going out to avoid disaster. The two did not expect that a speech at the court meeting would develop like this, so the two brothers cried for a long time. Chi Heiran didn't justify the nature of his departure, nor did he comfort them. He just said, there is no turning back when you start the bow, since you have already made the first move, then continue the innovation well. One day we will come back. Chi Heiran stroked the little bear's head and said, your mother always said that the most important thing in innovation is stability and perseverance. You already have perseverance, but what you lack is stability. Remember, don't be impatient just to get me back. Then the cheapest thing is outsiders. If the innovation fails, it will be in vain for us to leave Beijing today, and now we are leaving in despair, and it depends on you two whether we can come back in a good way. Both of them had high-spirited fighting spirit in their eyes. Chi Heiran was satisfied with this. Prince Rong's mansion was bustling with activity. Tiger Head and Little Lion heard that they were leaving today, and immediately yelled, it's too sudden, we're not happy with Brother Xiaoan yet. Mu Yangling was taken aback, and asked, Xiaoan is leaving too? Of course, our homework is the same. After speaking, he hurriedly sent someone to pass the message to Xiaoan. The twins follow suit, and they also spread the word to their little friend Xiaofu. Mu Yangling suddenly had a headache, and finally thought, anyway, it is impossible for Fan Zijin to let his son follow us, so let them notify. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1282. Hutu and Little Lion ran back to the house and simply packed 3 sets of clothes, then went to the study to pack the books they often used. The two quickly ran to the stable to hold their pony and waited. Little Leopard and Beizu were much more entangled. Holding their own toys, they wanted to take this one, and that one too. Mu Yangling said to the girl and woman who was serving them, in addition to the necessary daily necessities, you who play with these toys pack as much as you can, and if you can't take it away now, the team will catch up with it in 2 days. The nuns knew it well, and turned around to pack some important toys. Mu Yangling took the little hands of the 2 children and said, leave the things to the mothers to pack up. Let's go to the carriage. The little leopard hugged his mother's neck and asked, Mother, won't we come back after we leave? Of course not. This is our home. We just go out to play and come back after a while. Only then did little leopard feel at ease, and he patted his sister's little hand comfortingly, coaxing her in a childlike voice, don't be afraid, brother will protect you. Beizu hugged her mother's neck and said, I want mother to protect me. Mu Yangling felt guilty, apparently their sudden actions still frightened the children. Mu Yangling carried the two children into his arms and headed for the carriage. At this time, the morning sun was just emerging, and the morning glow in the east had been sinking for a long time, and the glowing red sun was trying to show its full face. The people in the capital had just woken up and were still preparing breakfast at home. There were some people walking sporadically on the street, and the shops doing breakfast business had already smoked. The motorcade of Prince Rong's mansion appeared on the street at this time, which was a bit unexpected, but the capital is prosperous, and there are many people traveling from south to north. Although few people in the inner city go out of the city so early, it is not unusual for everyone to watch. So the people on the street just took a curious look, and then went about their business. Fan Zijin walked beside Chi Heiran on horseback and told him, "Be calm when you encounter problems, don't act arrogantly, if you are unresolved, write to me and my cousin, or just listen to Aling's opinion." Fan Zijin thought that Mu Yangling was also unreliable at this point, so he immediately changed his mind and said, "Forget it, you should stop listening to her and ask Xiaoan. Although he is young, he is full of resourcefulness and courage. At least I can give it to you some comments." Chi Heiran had black lines all over his face. "Am I ashamed to ask a kid for advice?" "Yo, you also have times when you feel embarrassed," Fan Zijin said. "I don't think you like to listen to children the most. Forgot how you taught me." Fan Zijin imitated Chi Heiran and said, "Zijin, the children have their own ideas, we should respect them, maybe their ideas are more righteous than ours." Chi Heiran coughed lightly, and muttered in a low voice, "Then Xiaoan was also taught by Aling, can Aling be more reliable than him?" "So you also know that you are unreliable." Seeing that the city gate was right in front of him, Fan Zijin sighed and stopped arguing with him, saying, "Don't worry, there are me and my cousin in the capital, and I will help Xiao Xiang. You take care of it, and you also take care of my two children." Chi Heiran nodded, patted him on the shoulder and said, "Okay, it's not a parting for life and death, I'll be back in a while." Xiaoan and Xiaofu also stepped forward to say goodbye to their father happily, saying that they would definitely listen to their uncles and aunts this month and never cause trouble. At this moment, everyone thought that they would come back soon, half a year at most, 3 or 2 months at least. After all, they couldn't stay outside for too long with their families. But the most indispensable thing in this world is accidents. Although the courtiers had no choice but to acquiesce in the reform of the official system yesterday, it does not mean that they will not destroy it. There were really too few people who were able to fall asleep last night. There was even a secret meeting in the capital, and they made up their minds to give Chi Heiran a look today, so that the other party would know that their courtiers were not so easy to mess with. As Chi Heiran is a general with a large army in his hands, he is also the only prince of Daki, and he is also the deputy secretary of the Ministry of War. It is very difficult to catch the exact evidence of his crime, but there should not be too many specious suspicions. So early in the morning, the courtiers were gearing up for a tough battle, for which they even arrived outside the hall a quarter of an hour earlier than usual. Nearly half of the courtiers stood waiting outside the hall with dark circles under their eyes, and their faces were full of seriousness. When Rong Xian came, he glanced at everyone, and smiled at Yan Du with his eyes closed. "Did Zishan sleep well last night?" Yan Du glanced at the energetic Rong Xian, and said, "Jinyu sleeps well." "Naturally, how can you not sleep well if you have something on your mind?" Yan Du said indifferently, "It's too early to make a conclusion at this time, after all, the new official system hasn't started yet." The corner of Rong Xian's mouth twitched, he glanced at the officials, and sneered in his heart, if he wanted to use Chi Heiran as a target, it would depend on the emperor's consent. Although Rong Xian didn't hear the news of Chi Heiran leaving Beijing, Fan Zijin visited him last night. Although the other party didn't say it clearly, he could guess that Chi Heiran was going out of Beijing to avoid the limelight. Rong Xian felt that his main task today was to silence the officials so that they could not bring up Qi Heiran, so as to buy more time for the other party. Rong Xian felt that the best thing to do at this time was for the emperor to suspend the court, and the worry of simply suspending the court for 2 or 3 days would be resolved. Rong Xian also thought that Qi Heiran would leave Beijing in 2 or 3 days, and he didn't think he would leave today. With Heiran's arrogance, he would definitely not do such a thing. Apparently, Beguen also had the same thought as Rong Xian. They felt that if Qi Heiran's arrogance did not fight them to the end, they would stand firm for a while, and this was their chance. No one expected that Qi Heiran was no longer in the capital at this time. It was not until the sound of the net whip that Qi Heiran and Fan Zijian did not appear in the hall that everyone felt something was wrong. The courtiers comforted themselves in their hearts. It must be that Qi Heiran and Fan Zijian also knew that they had committed public anger yesterday, so they dared not come to the court today. Go straight to the debate. In fact, everyone is still a little timid to face Prince Rong. But Qi Ziyuan directly shattered their illusions. Qi Ziyuan said with a worried and bitter face, Prince Rong's old injury has relapsed, and he can no longer enter the court to participate in politics. Responsible, if there is no serious matter in the army, you are not allowed to disturb Prince Rong easily. Everyone was taken aback for a moment, then reacted and asked, then, what about the reform of the official system, Your Majesty? Qi Ziyuan frowned and said, the reform of the official system is a major matter for the entire imperial court. Prince Rong just made a suggestion, and all the ministers discuss it? Why bother to ask him about everything? The courtiers opened their mouths, but the impeachment papers in their hands could not be handed over. Everyone knew that the old injury on Prince Rong's body was caused by Da Qi, and now that his old injury had recurred, could they still impeach him for the undetermined suspicion?